Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Chavches contains one Mishnah and three primary sugyas. First of all, the Gemara is still exploring Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that the only proper way to destroy chametz is to burn it. The Gemara is still looking for a source. Then the Gemara will move on to the opinion of the Chachamim that there are other ways of destroying it. The Gemara will question exactly what the ways are and have a machlokes amaram on that subject. Then we'll get to the Mishnah, which will teach us the halacha of hana of chametz after Pesach is over. And the Gemara will then quote a lengthy brisa that brings three opinions of Tanaim as to when exactly chametz is aser, what isurim are aser when. Is it daraisa? Is it iser kares? Is it iser bahana? The Gemara will give sources for those opinions. And then the Gemara will show that the brisa conflicts with the Mishnah. The resolutions will have to wait for the next step. So first of all, Rabbi Yehuda we know holds that the only proper way to destroy chametz is to burn it. And the Gemara is trying to find sources for it. And Rabbi Yehuda has attempted to learn it from the source of Noiser, and the Gemara has shown that there is nothing about Noiser so far that we've been able to identify that means you should learn from Noiser to chametz. There are many other things which interfere. So Rabbi Yehuda now has his last attempt, and he says, look, Noiser, there is an isser to keep Noiser around. It says you're not allowed to leave the meat over and let it become Noiser. It's also aser bana, aser bachila, and has kares. Chametz is the only other thing where you find that. You're not allowed to keep it around. You're not allowed to keep chametz. It's also aser bachila, aser bana, and has kares. So therefore we're going to learn from Noiser to chametz, and there's nothing else that shows. Otherwise, just like Noiser has to be burned, chametz has to be burned. The Gemara says, well, there is something. And that something is, if you have a carbon ashum that was an ashum talay, which is a carbon where you brought if you're not sure that you violated an ifsar kares or not, like you ate a piece of fat and you don't know if it was shumon or chalev. Or if you have a carbon chatas oif habal suffix, that's someone who's not sure if they're obligated to bring a carbon chatas oif, a bird chatas. That's, let's say, a woman who had a miscarriage and she doesn't know if it was a child or some other object. So she has to bring a bird carbon al tanai. Maybe it's an oila, maybe it's a chatas. There's no isser of chulin la'azara on a bird. Now, these two carbonas do have an isser to keep them around. You're not allowed to have them be nicer. However, if any psul happens to them, besides for nicer, something goes wrong with them. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't burn it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the asham talay has to be buried, and the chatas ha'oiv has to be thrown into the stream that runs through the Beis Hamikdash. Now, it's interesting, because according to the Chachamim, it does have to be burned. So, according to the Chachamim, there wouldn't be a kasha on Rabbi Yehuda's source. However, Rabbi Yehuda himself, his own opinion is that it doesn't have to be burned. It has to be either buried or thrown into the river. That, therefore, shows that messes up Rabbi Yehuda's attempt to derive chametz has to be burned from Noiser has to be burned, because you have something else that has all the factors that Noiser has, and yet does not have to be burned. So the Gemara says it's interesting. Rabbi Yehuda had no response. It's interesting. It comes out that Rabbi Yehuda's own opinion has tripped up his attempt to show a source. So the Gemara has three expressions to show this idea that a person's own creation has been his undoing. The Gemara says, first of all, it's like somebody who makes plates and the mustard in the plate burned his lip. Abaye says it's like somebody who makes handcuffs and he was locked up in his own shackles. And Rava says it's like somebody who makes arrows and was killed by his own arrows. Each one is obviously a level stricter. Burning your lip is not as bad as getting locked up, which is not as bad as getting killed. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to discuss the opinion of the Chachamim. The Chachamim said you do not have to burn chametz. You can crumb it up, you can grind it up and spread it in the wind to throw it in the water. Now the Gemara says, how do you read this? You have to grind it up to throw it in the wind. That I see. Do you also have to grind it up to throw it in the water? Does grinding up apply to throwing it in the water? Or is it grinding up and throwing it in the wind? Or throwing it in the water without grinding? The Gemara says it could have the same question about avodah zarah. The halachas you have to destroy avodah zarah, and that it also says you have to grind it up and throw it in the wind or spread it in the water. And I have the same question. Do you have to grind it up to throw it in the water? So Gemara says this is actually going to be a machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Yosef. The Gemara, each one will say that there's a split halacha, and then the Gemara will have a brisa which shows that the halacha isn't split, but it'll be a kasha on Rabbah and Rav Yosef, and they'll each give their own answers. So Rabbah says it's as follows. There's a difference between Avodah Zarah and Chametz. Avodah Zarah, you don't throw in any body of water. You have to throw Avodah Zarah into the Yam HaMelech. Yam HaMelech doesn't have any ships, so nobody's going to pick it up. So there's no reason why you should have to grind it up. Just throw it into the Yam HaMelech. It's fine the way it is. Chametz, however, you might throw into any body of water. And if you throw it in whole, it may stick to a ship. And therefore, somebody will be having that chametz. Therefore, we want you to grind it up. So the halacha then would be chametz, you have to grind up before you throw it into the water. Avodah zarah, you don't have to grind up because you're throwing it into Yam HaMelech. Says Rav Yosef, the opposite is true. Chametz is something which gets ruined in the water. It'll melt away, it'll disintegrate in the water, it'll get destroyed. Why should you have to crumb it up? Avodah zarah could be made out of metal. Metal doesn't get ruined in the water. You want it to get completely ruined and destroyed. Therefore, the avodah zarah you have to grind up, and the chametz you don't. Now the Gemara says, interestingly, we have two brises, and they show clearly that you have to grind up all of it. The brisa says, if you have a chametz, then if you're throwing it in the wind, you got to grind it up, and if you're throwing it in the water, you have to grind it up. And if you have avodah zarah, if you're throwing it in the wind, you have to grind it up, and if you're throwing it in the water, you have to grind it up. So there is a support for both of them. It both shows that the one that they said you have to grind up, you do have to, but also there's an attack for both of them because they each said that one of them you don't have to grind up, but we see here clearly that you do. So the Gemara says they will each defend their position that this brisa, these two brisas do not contradict them. Rabbah will answer that I said that you don't have to grind up the avodah zarah, that's because you're throwing it into the Yam HaMelech. This brisa is talking about when you're traveling on a ship. It says so clearly. You're on a ship. So there, you're not in the Yam HaMelech, obviously. That's why you do have to grind it up there. And Rav Yosef will tell you that I told you that chametz doesn't have to be ground up. That's if it's a bread, which will get melted and destroyed. If, however, it's grains of wheat, which became chametz, there you do have to scatter them. You don't have to grind them. They're already ground. You have to scatter them because otherwise they will not fall apart. Okay, that concludes that discussion. Now we get to our next Mishnah, the second Mishnah in Parakal Shah. And this Mishnah discusses what is the halacha of chametz which has gone through Pesach and now it's after Pesach. So the Mishnah says, if it belonged to a goy on Pesach, you're allowed to get enough from it. If it belonged to a Jew, it's forbidden to get enough from it. And the Gemara says this is connected to the fact that there's an Isser Bal Yirah, and Rashi explains that the bottom line at the end of the Sugi will be that the Rabbanan created a fine. They knast you for having violated the Isser and kept chametz around, and therefore it becomes Asur B'Hana after Pesach. Now the Gemara is going to bring three opinions of Tanaim, and the Gemara will show at the end of a long discussion that neither of the three opinions fit in this Mishnah. The three opinions are Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Seglili, and they're discussing three zones of chametz and what its halacha is. The zones are the chametz before Pesach, that is, from midday on Erev Pesach, when the Isser chametz begins, at least according to some, from then until Pesach itself. Then there is on Pesach, the 7 days of the Yom Tov, and then there's after Pesach. What's the halacha in these three? So the Gemara brings three opinions as follows. Rabbi Yehuda says, before Pesach and after Pesach, it is a lav, Isser D'Oraisa, just a lav, no karis. On Pesach, it's karis. Rabbi Shimon says, before Pesach, it's mutter. Before Pesach, his precise language is before Pesach, it's not usher. It's a machlokes rishonim what he means. Some say he means that it's mutter. Some say he means that there is no lav, there is no loisase, there's no forbidden statement. However, it's still, you can't keep chametz around because you're violating the asay of destroying it, or it's a lav haba machlal asay. It's either an isser asay or a lav haba machlal asay. Now, on Pesach itself, it's kares, he agrees to that. And after Pesach, he also says that it's no problem, it's mutter, there's no isser after Pesach at all. Now, both these Tanaim, the Gemara says, hold that there's an isser hana. The Mishnah quotes the statement that it's an Isser Hana and says that it's referring to Rabbi Yehuda. However, according to Rabbi Shimon, there is also an Isser Hana, just not quite in the same time, and not necessarily the same strength. It could be an Isser Hana only midrabanan. The third opinion is Rabbi Seglili, and he says there is no Isser Hana at all. Chametz is never forbidden to get Hana from it. It's totally mutter b'Hana. Now the Gemara wants to explore the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Where does he get his halacha that there is Isser Hana from, and his time zones, and the Gemara will show how he conflicts about the sources with Rabbi Shimon. Now, there are three psukim that describe the Isser to eat chametz. One of them says, Lo yiseichal olav chametz, you cannot eat chametz with the carbon Pesach. Another one says, Lo ye'ochel chametz, you should not have chametz be eaten. right following that statement is another pasuk that says, Hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh aviv, today you are going out in the month of the spring. And the third pasuk is v'chol machmetzes lo yisachelu, should not eat anything which is machmetzes, slightly different word. So what are these three psukim? So Rabbi Yehuda says they are for the three zones. One is just before Pesach, one is on Pesach, one is after Pesach. Each one has a lav. The middle one is kares. Says Rabbi Shimon, no, the middle one is the only one which is aser. These three psukim aren't three times. The three psukim are three separate halachos. What are the three halachos? One is the aser of eating chametz. The other is the halacha that chametz which became chametz without somebody making it chametz. It just became chametz on its own. Water fell on flour. It became chametz, so that is also aser. And the third halacha, the third pasuk is to teach me a special halacha which is said elsewhere by Rabbi Haglili, that in Mitzrayim they only had Pesach for 1 day. It wasn't 7 days long. That's why it says Lo yechol chametz, and afterwards it says Hayoim atem yotzim b'chodesh aviv, that you shouldn't eat chametz. Today you are leaving. It's only today that you're leaving, and only today that there's an issue to eat chametz. So that's how they each understand the three psukim. Says the Gemara, how does Rabbi Yehuda know the two halachos that Rabbi Shimon said? How does he know that chametz which became chametz without human intervention, that's aser? So the Gemara says that's from the word machmetzes. The fact that we have the term machmetzes, things which become chametz, that's where we see that from. You don't need an entire pasuk for that. The extra pasuk is therefore for one of the three zones that I said. And how does he know that Pesach and Mitzrayim was only 1 day long? So the Gemara says that's from the fact that the word Hayom is written together with V'lo yechol chametz. It says Lo yechol chametz Hayom. You can't eat chametz today. That's where you see it. That doesn't use up the fact that Lo yechol is written in extra time. The fact that it's written together teaches you that halacha still didn't have to say you're not allowed to chametz 3 times. So that's why he does not require either of two sources. The Gemara adds another possibility. It could be that he doesn't hold of this halacha at all, that Mitzrayim was only 1 day. He doesn't have any drashas of smichas. He holds you don't make such drashas altogether. But that's why he has those. That's how Rabbi Yehuda deals with those halachas. And here he therefore has 3 psukim for 3 times, and Rabbi Shimon has 3 psukim for 3 halachas. Says the Gemara, what's Rabbi Yehuda's specific source? The pasuk says Lo sochal olav chametz. That's one of the psukim that said that you can't eat chametz olav on it. On it means on the carbon Pesach. That means from the time that the carbon Pesach could be brought, you already have an esrei to eat chametz. When could it be brought? From the 6th hour on Erev Pesach. That's when the zone of Isser Chametz begins. Says Rabbi Shimon, it can't be. It obviously can't be, because it says that you shouldn't eat chametz al matzos. It says lo sochal of chametz shivas yom tochal of matzos. It puts the isser of eating chametz together with the obligation to eat matzos, to connect the two. And it's only when there is a mitzvah to eat matzah that there is a isser to eat chametz. So there's only a mitzvah to eat matzah from Pesach night, from when the Yom Tov actually begins. So obviously the isser can't apply then. So says Rabbi Yehuda, no, that's not what that pasuk is for. That pasuk is connecting matzah and achilas chametz to tell you that the mitzvah of matzah applies whenever the mitzvah of not eating chametz applies. Meaning, through all generations, even when there's no Beis Hamikdash, even when there's no carbon Pesach, there is still a mitzvah of eating matzah. You may have thought the fact that it says you're supposed to eat the matzah together with the carbon Pesach, that would imply that if there's no carbon Pesach, there's no matzah. But it's not true. And that's why it's connected to, that's why not eating chametz and eating matzah are connected. But the time starts before the mitzvah of eating matzah begins. It starts from when the carbon Pesach itself begins. Now, how does Rabbi Shimon know that the mitzvah of matzah applies for all generations? Here's a different pasuk. It says, "Mi be'erev teichlu." You should eat it in the evening. That's redundant. You've already told us matzah z'marim echlu. You should eat matzah together with morer on the carbon. Saying be'erev teichlu is adding extra repetition. That's to tell me that you should do it throughout the generations. Says Rabbi Yehuda, no, that's not for throughout the generations. That's for people who, even in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, cannot eat the carbon. Like somebody who is Tameh or somebody who's far away from Yerushalayim. He's going to bring a Pesach Sheni, but this is to tell me that he has a mitzvah of eating matzah and maror on Pesach night itself. So the Gemara says, well, how is Rabbi Shimon going to know that halacha? So the Gemara says, you don't need a pasuk for that, because you have other people that cannot bring a carbon. Somebody who never had a bris milah because it's considered to be a sakana for him, it's not safe. Or somebody who is considered to be a stranger to Hashem, he doesn't keep certain halachas. Someone like that who's not bringing a carbon because he can't, he has a bris milah, or because he won't, he should eat matzah and maror. How do you know that? Because it says v'chol oror lo yochol boy v'chol ben necher. That's referring to somebody who's not keeping lo yochol boy. They can't eat it. They can't eat it, but they should definitely eat matzah and maror. So you see, there clearly there's a source for that, and that should apply for a tummy as well. Why should a tummy be different? Why should somebody who's far away be different? Just because they can't bring the carbon doesn't make them any different than these other people who can't bring the carbon. Therefore, they should also automatically be included. You don't need a pasuk for that, and therefore the pasuk is to teach me that the mitzvah of matzah and maror apply for all generations. So Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda will tell you, no, you need two psukim. You have a source written twice. One for the person who has no bris milah and the ben nechar, and one for the person who's tamei or far away. The Gemara now concludes its kasha. In our Mishnah, we had seen that after Pesach, there's an Isser Hana on chametz which belong to a Jew, but not chametz which belong to a non-Jew. Says the Gemara, it doesn't fit with any of the three opinions in our Brisa. It definitely doesn't fit with Rabbi Yossi who holds chametz is never Asur B'Hana. It definitely doesn't fit with Rabbi Shimon, who holds that there's no Isser at all after Pesach. And it doesn't even fit with Rabbi Yehuda, who says that there is an Isser Hana, but he doesn't differentiate between chametz which belong to a Jew and chametz which belong to a guy. So who is the author of our Mishnah?
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethe.daf@gmail.com.